No sooner did Donald Trump take the oath than the fight over science took to Twitter. In fact, when the National Park Service started tweeting about climate change, Trump issued a gag order to control the message. And so far, that seems to fit a pattern. Is it a new way of looking at the phrase political science?
And from the get-go, Trump has pleased his base by stripping the White House website of any mention of climate change or linking vaccines to autism or stopping funding for environmental studies. And today, he's signing an executive order rolling back the core of President Obama's environmental policy.
Well, all of this has created activists among a group that tend to be more reserved and who usually let the facts do the talking. But joining us to do the talking at the crossroads of politics and science are Jennifer Cherrier, the chair in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Brooklyn College, Jill Dvornik, the co-chair of the New York March for Science. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Mimi Bluestone, an activist with the group 350 Brooklyn. Welcome back to BK Live.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all for being here. We want to start with this idea that the director of the Center for Science and Democracy says that researchers seem more eager than ever to speak up their opinions on Trump versus presidents in the past. Why is that, if you can give us a general overview on that?
Why are scientists speaking out?
Yes.
Well, because it's hard to think of a president who has been more willing to play fast and loose with facts, which science is based on, and I can't think of any administration that has voiced its intention to slash science budgets to the extent that the president has said he wants to slash science budgets. So, since so much of our lives depends on having good scientific information, this seems like it's of great concern to the public in general, and it's obviously of great concern to scientists. I'm not a scientist, but these ladies are.
All right.
I'm coming from the activist side.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's speak to a scientist. We've got one side here who's out in the street ready to use their body and their voices to protest these policies, but you're making the scientist of the future. Has there been sort of a chilling effect on research or people who might even pursue science?
Well, so I am a scientist, but I'm also a citizen. But within academic institutions, it is a huge threat because we're training the scientists of the future to meet future environmental and global challenges. Right. And we have to feed the pipeline. So we're being attacked on several fronts, being able to handle this mission. And so, so for my young faculty, it poses a huge problem because they have to build their research programs, and they're unable to find the funds to do that. And then it also affects our students who are training because they're not going to be able to be exposed to that type of research, which is fundamental to their effectiveness in joining the workforce. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do is to start to have more conversations and increase the public discourse and political discourse and make our science relevant. Or communicate the relevance of our science.
And speaking of those conversations, Jill, you're organizing this giant walk for NY March for Science.
Yeah.
Are you surprised to see new advocacy groups emerging for science and scientists? What are your feelings on that?
I'm not, and part of like the core of what we want our march to be is kind of like a celebration of science. Like, I am a scientist, I love science, and I want it to be accessible to everyone, and I think a lot of the problems that are boiling over now have been, long stemming in bits and pieces creating, and a part of what we like to do is go why, and where does it start, and how could we fix it, and I know a lot of young scientists want to be a part of that conversation of like, okay, we can do more, what should we do more, and how can we improve this, like what can we do, and so the march is one way to raise our voices and get the whole community together to be like, we love and support science.
Jill, where's the march happening? When? How many cities?
So the march is, it's global. So I only know about our city, New York City, but it's happening in countries all over the world. And in New York,
something like 400 cities.
It's huge, yeah. I know that the main organizers out of Washington, D.C., I don't think they even realized that it was going to grow to this. Yeah. And just from the support that we're getting here in New York City, I'm like I'm in awe and I'm humbled every single day at the emails and the letters that we get.
Yeah.
Like, people really do love science and they want to come out and support it. And I think that will, in its own right, have such a great effect on the policies to support publicly funded science.
So Mimi, we see that people are ready to take to the streets to show their support for science and scientists. What other kind of organizations and activism are people undertaking in support of science?
Well, I come at this as a climate activist, so I'm really rooted in the climate movement, and the climate movement depends on science in every possible way, because everything we know about climate depends on having solid science. And also, it's essential to respect and support the science, which is really becoming an issue, and
So
it shouldn't be.
We're actually sitting here probably moments away from President Trump signing an order that's really going to impact the EPA and, in the opinion of many, set back the work that had been laid for decades. So what is the community ready to mobilize around that action?
Well, there are a few things that are going on. First of all, there's going to be a demonstration this evening at Trump Tower, which a whole slew of environmental organizations will be participating in. Because again, any effort to say climate change is not real or climate change is not human-induced, it's a slap in the face to any scientist who's ever worked on this topic and who knows that that's not the case. It's also a slap in the face to anybody who's gone outside in December and it's been 75 degrees outside in New York City. So that's one thing that's going on. Another really important thing that's going on is that we are also mobilizing a major climate march a week after the March on Science, which will be on April 22nd.
Right.
We have a major climate march in Washington, D.C. on April 29th, Saturday, April 29th. We have buses leaving from every part of New York City, including we have buses leaving from Grand Army Plaza early on the morning of the 29th. If you're interested in finding out about that, you can go to People's Climate New York and learn about the New York involvement in that D.C. march. So that's going to involve a very wide range of climate organizations around the country.
Very cool.
Jennifer, I want to ask you, getting back to the science side of things, how you feel the Trump administration, what the worst case scenario for their new policies and how that would affect the field of science?
Well, it would gut it, right? There's a lot of inconsistencies with the cuts that he's making and the spending that he's doing. I study water. I'm a water scientist and an aquatic scientist, and just looking at climate change and thinking about how climate change could potentially impact water. And then we're talking about the water and the food and the energy nexus, and how all of that then affects our communities, how it affects vulnerable populations. So, I mean, it has incredibly far-reaching impacts because it's not just the science. You then start to think about the cuts to the housing and urban development and the cuts to workforce development, and it's a domino effect.
I want to ask you, you are used to dumbing it down for us lay people. Like if you say, I work with water, okay, that's one way of explaining what you do. But is there anything that you could say, because Donald Trump watches our show, right? Is there anything that you can say that would put it on his level so he could understand why science is important and is not something to be trifled with or underfunded, and how he should move forward?
Well, science is the economic driving force of our nation. We have been a leader in scientific research for decades. And I mean, if you just want to look at what science has given our society, that's just a good place to start, whether you're talking about health, which also goes back to climate change and waterborne diseases, whether you're talking about food, or if you're looking at workforce development, or if you're looking at vulnerable populations. I mean, let's just look at what happened here in New York City. $19 billion worth of damage from Superstorm Sandy. Or if you look at impacts to water. So what he wants to do is he wants to remove regulation and compliance and Superfund cleanup, but he still wants to build up drinking water supplies and wastewater treatment infrastructure. There's a incongruity. It doesn't work. And also, ultimately, you want to keep the economy going and growing. And small businesses are a big part of that. And the green economy is the future. And we'll lose our position within the global economy by not supporting science and workforce development and health. You know, everybody deserves well-being. And that's what we pride our nation on, is inclusive well-being. And this threatens that.
And Jill, I want to ask you a similar question. What is the message the New York March for Science is trying to deliver to the administration?
Our main message is that we are here, the March and then the nonprofit that has formed from it is here to support publicly funded science and scientists. And one of the things that we really think at the heart of it is making science accessible to everyone. And as a mentor in a high school program, I see that, you know, our youth get a lot of opportunities, and there's so many programs built up to kind of engage them in science. But I'm also realizing that there's a core demographic of adults who have nothing to do with STEM careers, but also don't understand science. And so they hear the scientists like come out with these, you know, facts and papers. And as scientists, we just think people should listen to us and trust us. And you know, decades ago, that's where it was, and now there's all this other misinformation. And so a part of what we want to do is really emphasize the transparency in science and not just say, okay, here are the facts, but like, let's create programs so that you can understand how scientists come to these facts, so you can understand how research is done, so that you can begin to trust and believe it and distinguish for yourself a scientific fact, you know, evidence-based theory, and just misinformation.
So I think a feeling in a lot of communities when Donald Trump was elected that instead of making the progress that they had hoped to over the next 4 years, they were going to be fighting a lot just to hold ground. So I wondered, with all of that energy that is coming from the science community, just to stay where we are, not even to move forward with initiatives that would halt global warming or any of these other issues, what kind of capital are we going to have to spend just to maintain the status quo that's already not working?
Well,
from any
political
of you
capital,
got
financial capital, I
in
think
every way,
that,
and just the loss of advance over those 4 years.
you know, we're facing a terrible loss in so many areas. We're facing setbacks. We're facing you know, horrible things are happening to people. Let's not kid ourselves. People are being deported left and right. You know, there's some really disastrous things that are going on. At the same time, it's amazing to me the way people have come together. It is just extraordinary to me how my organization and so many organizations have just been flooded with new people since the election. Yeah. And so we have, and we see in the, you know, in the Republicans' failure to implement their repeal of Obamacare, which they had been promising for 7 years, you know, we're seeing the effects of that kind of citizen mobilization. So I think it's happening, and it has to continue to happen. I think you know, there's sort of a tendency. There's been a sort of a tendency on the part of a lot of people when their candidate is elected, they go, okay, he'll take care of everything. We can go to sleep now. And I think that's over. I think people realize they have to be engaged.
Yeah, I would just like to add, I think it's a really important time in our nation's history too, and for us as citizens and as scientists and as artists to come together and not be afraid to get to the boundary, not run away from polarization. It's time to find common ground. We don't need to think alike, but we have to learn how to act together for a common fate and for a common goal. And so, you know, it's time to build collectives, and it's not just science that's under attack right now, it's also the NEA, it's the NEH, it's public broadcasting, which communicates that science to communities that don't have access to the science or to the arts. Yeah. And so, and our vulnerable populations are threatened. So this is, I think, actually a really positive time to come together as a people. Whether or not where you are on the political spectrum doesn't matter, but we have to find common ground.
This is a nonpartisan issue.
It is a nonpartisan issue, and we see that. Like we've received emails of support from, you know, religious groups and from, you know, people are Republican, and we're not, as a nonprofit in the march, we are completely nonpartisan, and we welcome everyone. We're just here to bring science together with the community, and we are for publicly funded science, and as she said, a lot of the hardest hit areas will be, the most vulnerable areas are the ones that kind of need this open access the most, and integration. And I think historically, whether it's been budget cuts or just tragedy in America, the one thing that we all is resilient, and we're seeing that now. People are coming together. People want to get involved, and that's the best thing that we can do to solve this problem, is work together.
Does it fortify you in any way that the president is prepared to spend $20 billion on research to get us to Mars? Which he addressed this weekend in his address after healthcare went down the tubes. He said, but $20 billion, we're going to Mars.
Well, fundamental curiosity-based research is important. So I don't think that you should rob Peter to pay Paul. Yeah. But there's importance in that research as well, right? But it could be a diversion too, because I find it interesting that most of the funding that's been removed has been that research that looks at our planet that we're on right now. All the satellites that look at our planet, but yet it seems ironic. It seems ironic.
I think it's also interesting that I think it's all being presented as a zero-sum game. And I think the opposite is true. I think that spending on healthcare benefits the society as a whole and pays all kinds of economic dividends, just like basic research pays all kinds of economic dividends and is, as you're saying, the engine of economic growth. And we're missing great opportunities in alternative energy, in healthcare. We're missing out. So rather than cutting back on these things, we should recognize that this is where the future lies, and we should really be priming the pump.
Well, thank you for representing the future in that way, and coming here on BK Live and talking about these issues that are so important to you. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll have to have you back again sometime between this Earth Day and the next one to talk about how things have changed or are changing. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
For the better, hopefully, by the next time.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so very much.
Thank you.